that getting your way would make you happy, because you don't see that part of it. If I get my way, it is often, not always, but often at the expense of others, and then they torment me. And you expect to be happy doing that? But that's the way it works, isn't it? You get your way, and then they torment you because they didn't get theirs. And I kind of resent it. This is the recipe for happiness? This makes sense? It sounds like one heck of a fantasy to me. Because it requires that no one ever resent that you're getting your way and they're not getting theirs. It requires that everyone change, doesn't it? Now, you think that's going to happen? That's pretty unreasonable, isn't it? It might sound pretty to you, but I just don't think it's going to happen. So we're going to end up with the real situation. If you get your way, there are going to be some people who resent it, and they're going to come gunning for you, in one way or another. And then I don't think you're going to have your way anymore. You're going to be miserable again. It's a silly idea. If I had my way, I'd be happy. Perhaps if you lived on a planet all by yourself, that might work. But not where there's a bunch of people who are all different. That's what we started out with, one of the ideas. We're all different. There's no one thing that will make everyone happy here. Is there? Things that make you happy, another person doesn't like. You can't do this. It's not possible. So you find the obstruction. You see if you can investigate it until you see it as an illusion. And all I can say is that that's probably one of the hardest. A dear friend of mine used to say, getting your way is the first decision you ever made, and it's probably the last one to go. You'll probably have it longer than all the rest combined. But you can whittle away at it. You can sort of say, well, I don't have to get my way here, and I don't have to get my way here, and I don't have to get my way here, and I don't have to get my way here, and kind of make it a little bit less of an obstruction, huh? Until finally the day comes when you say, I don't have to get my way at all. Who cares? You can do that, can't you? Take little aspects of it and say, okay, I have to get my way in this. And maybe see, no, I don't. That one is rough. We really, really are convinced that if only I had my way, everyone would be happy. That is the belief, isn't it? If I had my way, we'd all be happy. I see no evidence of that fact. It's the same thing with what you said, okay? You make some efforts to see what vital interest is. You sort of make some efforts to get there. And you see what comes up and stops you. And then you start investigating those things very specifically, okay? And see if you can remove the obstruction to that. And not wait till you hit on it by chance while you run through the 5,000. This would take too long. I've heard that described in this sort of talking about things, that's like peeling an onion. What an unpleasant thought, huh? You like peeling onions? I find that a necessary evil, personally. I like the taste of cooked onions, but I'm not too fond of peeling them. But we'll forget about the obnoxious part, okay? The reason I guess they use that is that little layer effect, huh? Well, what makes you think there's an end to the layers of the knot eyes? Why do you presume they're like an onion and sooner or later you get to the heart and there's nothing left to peel? Do you know that's true? And this is a mighty big onion. Even if that's a fact, how long is it going to take you? And that is kind of the way it works, huh? Every time you take care of a set of knot eyes, you find more. I can see why people came up with the idea of peeling an onion, huh? You finally get that one layer off, and look, there's another layer under it. And you peel that one off, and guess what? I've always told people, you got to learn how to do that. You've got to learn how to peel them. But you damn well better hope there's a shortcut, and that isn't the only way to do it. But you can't learn a shortcut until you've learned the hard way. That's the way it goes. And if you do learn a shortcut when you don't learn the hard way, then you don't understand why the shortcut works. So you don't know how to use it all the time, you understand? Doesn't do you much good. You can only use it under very particular conditions because you don't understand it, so you don't know how to apply it. You get it? But when you understand the thing, then you can see shortcuts. But don't learn the shortcuts first. Then you won't really know what you're doing.
So how long before you take the shortcut?
Probably never would be my guess. That would be my guess, I'm sorry to say. I would love that not to be true, because the shortcut is the thing that nobody seems to want to do. And this is part of it. Seeing that my way would not bring happiness. It would produce more misery. The shortcut is to take a look at the purpose of my life, which can sort of be expressed that way as well as the way we do it. Huh? The purpose of my living is to regain the non-disturbed state. Well, what does that mean? It means everything is my way all the time. So I'm really talking about the master decision here with this my way thing, aren't I? If I had my way all the time, I'd be non-disturbed. That was my first decision about how to get non-disturbance. And that's the shortcut. You take a look at the idea of non-disturbance and you say, would this actually be good for me? What if I got it? I sort of ran this by a bunch of people last night. One person was the guinea pig, and they said what was non-disturbance to them out loud so everybody could listen and laugh. And then I said, okay, now what happens if you actually get that? What would life be like? You know what you believe life would be like, but imagine that you actually have it. Now that we've put it in very specific terms, because you've never done that, I'll bet you. You never sat down and actually said what it is you're trying to get. You've accepted the generalization. I want non-disturbance, yes, but it means something very peculiar and particular to you. You don't want to get non-disturbance the same way I do. I know that for a fact. Otherwise, we'd have no argument. Isn't that right? We'd both be working at the same thing in the same way and want the same things, and we'd never argue, would we? What would there be to argue about? So I know you don't want non-disturbance the same way I do. Besides, folks have told me too many times that I'm what disturbs them. So they can't possibly want non-disturbance the same way I do, huh? I'm working at getting non-disturbance, and it appears to disturb them. So the only way for them to get non-disturbance is for me to cease and desist getting it myself, apparently. I bet you're in the same boat, huh? So just saying non-disturbance is not an answer. That's a generalization. It applies to everyone, which means it applies to no one. You have to see what you think would be non-disturbance, what you're trying to do with your life, and take a look at it and say, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? maybe you didn't hear this, but the not I's are all how. They are a how, okay? How to get non-disturbance. If I don't want non-disturbance anymore, what do I need with a how to get it? If I don't want poison ivy, what do I need with a how to walk through poison ivy? You understand? I'm not interested. You start talking to me about how to walk through poison ivy. You think I'm going to go attend a seminar on that? Would you? Somebody gives up a seminar. How to walk through poison ivy. You think they're going to sell a lot of those? Because nobody wants poison ivy, do they? Nobody wants a method to do that. Doesn't that look like a shortcut to getting rid of the not I's to you? Get rid of the thing that they're all designed to get. Then what interest do you have in them? They can say anything they want. You don't care.
So that's changing the master decision.
Yeah, that's the shortcut.
I had a dream one time that a bunch of us were on this main road, and you were there, and you were showing us a shortcut. And had this suitcase.
I bet you're all afraid of it.
I had this big suitcase, and I dropped it. And I could either go back for it, or I could keep following you. I didn't go back for it.
Good for you.
But I did keep wondering what was in it.
I didn't hear what you said. Keep wondering what?
I kept wondering what was in that suitcase.
Garbage.
Yeah.
I wouldn't give it a second thought if I were you. That is the shortcut, is to do enough work so that you understand the idea of seeing illusions. You know what it takes to see an illusion and things by working on the self and the not I's and the conditioning and so on. And then one day you bite the bullet and you say, let's look at the master decision now. I know there's still, Lord knows how many not I's left. I don't care. Let's look at the master decision itself. What do I want to be non-disturbed? What do I believe would give me non-disturbance? Is it worth the price I'm paying for it? And you take a look at it and you use all that stuff you learned about how to see illusions when they're in front of your face, and you apply it to the master decision itself. I've just taken care of most of the not I's at this point. That's what they're about. They come up and say, if you do this, you get non-disturbance. And I say, so? How suggestible am I to that when I don't want what they have to offer anymore? Don't you get it? That is the shortcut. But you can't do it until you've learned how to see illusions. And you know, from the last little seminar that we had, our last little workshop, you've been around this stuff all this time and you still don't really understand that. We had to go through that whole thing about the scientific method and how to get at the facts when you have illusions, huh? So I think you got a ways to go before you can even take the shortcut. Does that make sense? But that is a shortcut. If I don't want what you're selling, I probably won't have the urge to buy anymore. Isn't that right? I just took care of the whole issue. And that's the way I feel when they call and offer me the newspaper. I don't want it. I really don't care what great offer you have for me. Do you? Well, we'll give it to you for 3 weeks for free. I don't want it for free. I actually tell them when they call me up, please don't. Why? We're offering it to you for free. Well, I know there's a catch in the free thing. We'll forget about that part. You know what I tell them? I know. Are you offering to come pick it up and throw it in the garbage for me too? Because that's what I'm going to do with it. I don't want the newspaper. So you come and you throw it in the front yard, and I end up with a stack of newspapers laying out there that I got to go pick up and throw in the garbage. You going to do that too? That's the way I feel about the newspaper, okay? I don't read it. It just sits out there and gets all funny looking.
So when you become just viscerally aware that this master decision is just doesn't work and would be bad, you just stop caring about it.
It'd be the death of me.
Yeah, that you just stop caring about it. You're just not interested anymore.
That's right.
It doesn't gnaw away at you. It's like you just finally just go, this is just...
What if someday I could actually get it?
Yeah, this would be...
I'd run like hell. That's what would happen on that day. If you told me, I can guarantee you, Phil, non-disturbance, I would run the other way. I would be standing there saying, get thee behind me, Satan.
You're not just going, isn't there some sneaky way to get what I want? No, you just have to...
I don't... I have what I want.
Right.
I have what I want. That's just all there is to it.
And it's not non-disturbance.
This is what I do when I have what I want. But life is not about getting something.
It's about being aware.
Well, you make your own judgment about what it is, because I ain't saying it. But it's a whole different game. I have what I want. I don't want non-disturbance. So you really can't tempt me with non-disturbance. I hope. You never know. Somebody might come one day with something that will tempt me. I don't know. But so far, anytime it's been offered, I thought it was kind of funny. If they were serious, I just wanted away from them. I have what I want. There are other things to do besides getting what you want. You don't know that because you're obsessed with getting what you want. I hope someday you find that out. Any other questions or comments before we went way over, way past time for lunch? All right, let's take a break. So we looked at one of the ideals that kind of keeps this game going, huh? If I had my way, I'd be happy. So I'll keep on doing what I'm doing, expecting to get my way, working towards getting my way. But there is, which I'm not too sure is true. I don't know about you. I'm not too happy when the people around me are upset. How about you? So I kind of look at getting my way tends to upset somebody somewhere. Most of the time, somebody didn't get what they wanted as a result. You ever kind of notice that? So how are you going to be happy under those conditions? You get your way and upset everybody else, and then you're going to be happy. Don't know if that's going to work out. But you got to look how much of the effort is put into trying to get my way. Isn't that an awful lot of one's efforts? Because then you'll be happy. And then being disappointed when it didn't work out. On and on. Maybe it's just as well. At least this way, I'm not always the author of everyone's misery, huh? It could be that if I got my way, I would always be to blame for why everybody else is unhappy. And I don't know how much fun they'd be around then. There is another big ideal that we need to look at, which is how things work. We all know that if you want to go to the grocery store, you go out and you grab your favorite method of transportation and you go there and you buy your groceries and come home, right? That's the way it works, right? Under ideal conditions. Of course, in real life, the stop signs are out today. It takes me a lot longer to get there than it does. And another day, it's really crowded, and everybody's in a bad mood, and I have a miserable time. And another day, I get the clerks who don't seem to want to work. They would prefer to have a chat with their friend. That's kind of what we got last night, wasn't it? We went and stood in line, and everybody was standing around talking. I don't know what they were talking about. They thought it was fun. Always, not always, but there's often something in as simple a thing as going to the grocery store, isn't it? It makes it not be that nice, ideal way that you know it could be. Just a simple thing like going to the grocery store, huh? Something that makes it a little bit rougher than it ought to be. I had to deal with this just to go get groceries, right? Pretty common story, isn't it? I was just doing the simple thing and I had to deal with all of this. What's the world coming to? Heard that story a few times? Yeah. Because we don't know how things work. We think that's the way it works. It's a nice sequence of events, right? You finish one, you move on to the next. That's the way things are, right? A sequence of events. You finish one, you get to do the next one. One has to precede the other, and that's the way it works, right? Isn't that what you expect?
Yeah.
Is that the way it actually works?
No.
So we tell a story about the way things work in reality, which says that it's not a sequence of steps. It is four forces that work together to get things done. And one of those forces is evil. It is nasty. It is bad. You'll hate it. I promise you. And it's absolutely essential to getting everything done. So here's the way things really work. You get an idea about what you want to do, you map out that pretty little sequence of events that will get it done, and then you start working on it, which we can call taking initiative, which I misspelled, I do believe. Right? You take some initiative to get the first little sequence in your events done. What happens next? It gets done and you go on about your way, right? What happens next is that you meet up with resistance. Something that stops you from doing it, or at least works at stopping you. That's the way it always happens, whether you're aware of it or not. Sometimes the initiative is pretty, or the resistance, the second force is pretty minor. It's an itty-bitty little thing that you don't care about dealing with. You don't notice it. So it's not there, as far as you're concerned. And then you say that that's the way it always is, or ought to be anyway. But sometimes the resistance is pretty big and takes a lot of effort to deal with, and then you say everything's falling apart. So as far as I can tell, what most people call second force, since they don't know that that's just part of getting things done, is a whole list of things. Bad luck. See, if I'd been lucky, it would have just been that nice sequence of events straight through, with nothing to interfere with me. Misfortune, of course. Evil. That is one of the things people call second force. It is evil. There is an evil force out there that hates me. It hates all of us. It tries its best all the time to stop us. And there are all those evil people out there, aren't there? Those bad people who just delight in making the rest of us miserable. Isn't that right? They're bad. Oh, that's another thing we like to call it, huh? Bad. The bad guys. Because we don't know, that's just part of the way things work. Every effort that you put out will always be met by an equal and opposite effort. Period. I don't know of any exceptions to this. It's the way it always happens. And sometimes you're so used to it that you don't see it. It's just part of it as far as you're concerned. But sometimes it gets noticeable and you get upset. It shouldn't have happened this way. Why is it that it's always me that the traffic lights go out on? Why can't it happen when I'm not on the road? Why is there always an accident when I want to go somewhere? That's the way things work. As far as I'm concerned, this is one of the things that people, if they understand, will change their lives. This simple thing, the understanding that resistance is part of getting a thing done. It is not an evil outside force that tries to stop you. It's part of getting it done. And we just don't see how things work. These two things go against each other, and they basically result in immobilization. The harder you try, the more things come along to stop you. And those two forces together actually create the third force, which is the form that the whole thing will take. Every created thing has to have a form in the physical universe, doesn't it? Driving to the grocery store has a form. If you could see the whole trip, it has a shape to it, doesn't it? That's its form. Everything has a form of some kind if it's created. That's what makes the form. First and second force working together. Unfortunately, since we don't know about second force and we don't like it, we fight it, don't we? And so we don't have a lot of say in the form. Isn't that interesting? How many things ever quite turn out the way you wanted them to? You may end up getting what you want, but isn't it always slightly different than what you thought it was going to be? Believe it or not, most of that is because you don't know how to work with second force, so you don't know how to determine the form. You get whatever form you get because you decided to fight second force, and that changes the form. If you get it at all. If you fight second force enough, you never get past the point of those two. But that's what determines the form in a thing. What kind of initiative and what kind of resistance you get. It's really obvious in a mold, isn't it? What is a mold but resistance to something that you poured into it? Well, isn't that what gives it its form? It's really obvious in certain things, isn't it? The second force is what produces the form, huh? The initiative is you pouring a bunch of stuff into it. The second force is the mold that keeps it from going in all sorts of different ways and constrains it to a particular shape, which I don't imagine that liquid wants to do. Apparently the liquid wants to just sprawl out, doesn't it? That something resists its flow, holds it there for a while until it turns into a solid, and now you got a form. Isn't that right? Really obvious there, isn't it? It's obvious with plants. If you do a little playing around, try sometime planting one seed really shallow and another one deeper and see if they don't come out different. And put a rock on another one and see if it has the same shape as one that don't have a rock on it. They may both grow if the rock isn't too big, huh? But do you suppose that they're going to have the same shape? One with a rock on it, one that doesn't? Think the plant's just going to grow right straight through the rock? And that resistance determined its form, didn't it? It's got to go around the rock. It doesn't have a nice straight stem. Take the rock away, does it go straight? Don't know. It did never do that. I have a feeling it'll probably be all twisted for the rest of its time. Don't know. You get it? That's what determines the form, what kind of second force you get. It's just the way it is. But we don't know about this. And then these three forces all work together to produce some kind of outcome. That's the way things work. Whatever you do. It's in everything that you do. Fortunately, in many things that you do, it's so much just a part of the way things have always been that you don't even see it. You don't even know the resistance is there. One of the favorite examples is walking. How would you walk if there were no gravity keeping you from flying off into outer space? How would that work? Wouldn't that be kind of funny? The first step you took would be the last one you ever took on planet Earth because you'd go flying off into outer space and that'd be the end of you? You couldn't even walk without resistance, could you? Because that's what walking is. You propel yourself up and something pulls you back down. Fortunately, you don't go straight up and down. So the form of that is a little arc, isn't it? And you're now in a new spot. Isn't that neat? And you do it over and over again, and pretty soon you're somewhere else. You got a fourth force. I'm on the other side of the room. How did I get on the other side of the room? I initiated going up in the air, and second force kept me from actually doing it. I did work those two things together over and over and over. That gave a form called walking, and pretty soon I'm somewhere else, huh? Isn't that the way it works? But you don't see the second force in that, do you? It's just walking. It's all one thing, because that's the way a created thing is. You don't see the individual forces in it once it's done. Do you see the mold on something when you buy it? They sell it with the mold. So you have the second force too? Or are you just buying the form so you can get the result? See, they only do part of the four forces, huh? You've got to supply the last one, which is to use the form for something, apply a little bit more initiative, and then you get a result, huh? But they don't sell it with the second force, do they? You only get the results of the second force. In the case of a mold, they get to use the second force to produce another one. Isn't that neat? They take some more initiative and put it into the second force and make another one for sale. Every completed thing has all those four forces having gone into it to produce it, okay? But you can sure look at a molded object and guess what the mold must have looked like, huh? It's true for everything. You may not be able to see the second force in the completed, but you can kind of guess what it must have been based on the outcome if you understand things. Do you get what I'm saying? Second force appears to be one of two things to human beings: invisible or evil. That's when you notice it. So no one believes in it. You understand? When it's beneficial as far as you're concerned, it's invisible to you. It's just part of getting it done. When it's not beneficial, it's an active force coming from somewhere working against you. You don't see it as part of it then. So you never see second force at all. You get it? It's always there. And we don't expect it, do we? How many people do you know who go into a thing expecting problems? Expecting things not to work out quite the way they want, expecting something completely unanticipated to come in and be part of getting it done. About the only people I know who do that are craftsmen and business people, huh? And I bet they go home and then don't expect it anywhere but at work. What do you think? See, we know that's part of doing things, don't we? In the business world, you plan for it, which I think is kind of funny. How are you going to plan for the unexpected? But you at least anticipate it, don't you? Anybody who ever budgets for just what they know needs to be done to get the job done is going to go over budget, aren't they? I know whenever I sell anything, I always figure out what I think it's going to cost and then add at least 50%. And hope I don't lose my shirt, because there was more second force than I anticipated. Now, that's a good way to go out of business, as far as I'm concerned, is not take second force into account. Whatever you think it's going to take, add more, because it's going to cost more before you're over. Isn't that about right? But then we go home, and on all the rest of our lives, we expect that there will be no second force, and I can just go to the grocery store. After all, I'm tired. I deserve it to be easy to get food. Yada, 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 right? I look at whoever I'm living with, and I expect them to be agreeable and happy to see me all the time. Shocked when it doesn't happen, unless, they're just normally disagreeable. I don't expect second force in most of the life. Only certain small places do I expect it. Isn't that right? So what's the outcome of that little fantasy? Everything will go smoothly in my way all the time. What's the outcome of that little fantasy? See? So getting to understand this, that this is how all things are done. We call this the four forces. Everyone assumes that there are two forces that create, cause and effect. We all know that's the way it is. But it turns out that that's not true. There is no such thing as cause and effect. There are four forces. And one thing that bamboozled me for years, because it appeared to me that first and fourth force were cause and effect, and there were two things that came in between. Until finally one day I finally got through my head, there is no cause. Initiative is not the cause, and there is no effect. They're a lie. Another one of those things people talk about that does not exist. It's an illusion. Even in the four forces, none of them maps to cause and none of them maps to effect. They're an entirely different way of doing things than cause and effect. I initiate, something comes along and stops me. I do that enough times, I eventually get a form. I work with the form for a while, getting even more resistance, and I eventually get a result. You put all those things together, you now have something created, or something done. That's the way it actually works. We have been so conditioned to not see that. It's, for most people, very hard to even notice. You have to work at it. Because we've been completely conditioned to believe in cause and effect, haven't we? So it makes the little game of looking for the cause of things even funnier. What if there is actually no cause? What if there is nothing to blame it on? What if that's just the way things are? And there's no fixing it. In fact, I can pretty well guarantee you it'll be different next time, because you'll probably get different second force. So you can't even plan for it. You have no control over second force, do you? None whatsoever. It is provided for you, isn't it? Or am I wrong and one of you has a gravity generator that's providing it for the rest of us? Anybody own that thing? Or was it just provided? That one seems to be pretty constant. It's been going on for a long time, about the same, huh? But I have a sneaky suspicion that if you could wait around long enough, you'd find even that one would change over enough time. What do you think? I bet you in a few million years, gravity here at planet Earth will be different than it is now. I bet there are physicists who could tell me why. But just knowing the way things are, I expect that that's true. I have no clue if it is or not. I've just noticed that that's the way second force is. It's always changing. The rate of change is what's a question, okay? Gravity's rate of change seems to be very slow, and I may not notice it in this lifetime. Other things, the rate of change is very fast, and every time I do something that's different. That kind of match your experience? So I totally expect that if I were to sit down with some physicist and ask him, will gravity always be the same here on planet Earth? He'd have some explanation for why it wouldn't. Don't know if that's true or not. I've never looked into it. It's just what I expect from what I do know of things. Second force is provided for you, and it's not always the same. You don't need to go out of your way to be second force to anybody, folks. Don't worry. If you don't do it, they'll get it. I personally do not choose to do that, to intentionally be second force to other people's efforts. Seems kind of weird to me. Why don't you let life provide that for them, okay? Sometimes I can't help it, but I don't go out of my way to do it, all right? I'm always second force to something just by being here. If I get to the grocery store before you, then I'm second force to you, huh? Because I'm in line in front of you and you just want to get through. Not much I can do about that if I want to buy groceries, unless I want to just keep giving up my place until nobody's in the store, huh? But I don't know that I'm going to go intentionally cut in front of folks just to make sure they have some second force to their little trip to the store. You see, I think they'll get more than enough provided for them without my assistance. That's just a personal point of view. I don't see much reason, just because you understand this, to think that it's your job to provide second force. I think it seems to be provided pretty well all by itself. What do you think? I don't need to do it. Although I will often end up in the role of second force to others, won't I? They want to do something and I'm in the way. Or what's even worse, I may not want them to. I may resist their efforts quite intentionally, huh? Which brings up another interesting idea, which is that there are different kinds of second force. There are, as far as I know, 3 kinds of second force. The first 2 you can always work with and end up getting the things done. The third one, maybe, maybe not. That's all I can say. Maybe you can work with it, maybe you can't. The first one is passive second force. That's things that just resist you because they're there. They don't know they're resisting you, okay? Believe it or not, things like time and space are 2 very common forms of second force. And I don't think that they know that they're resisting you, do they? Although I've heard stories about a magic trail that gets longer as you travel it, so you'll never get to the end. You ever heard that story? I've heard some stories that have trails in them like that. The more you travel them, the longer they get. Now that would not be passive second force, would it? And I think with second force like that, you might never get to the end, okay? Fortunately, the road doesn't do that. Time and space and things like that don't do that, do they? They don't change just to annoy you. Although I hear people tell it. You might not know that. This road gets longer every time I travel it. You ever heard somebody say that? Then there's active second force. That's something that is working against you. And believe it or not, like I say, that can be worked with and you can end up getting it done anyway. Active second force is just as big an assistance to getting a thing done as passive second force is, if you're willing to work with it instead of fighting it. If you decide that whatever is providing the active second force is evil and you start fighting it, you probably won't get it done. I've had many cases where somebody came up and said, I'm going to stop you, I'm not going to let you do this. And I said, okay, good. Want some help? That sounds like fun. I'd like to stop me too. How would you like to stop me? Let's work on this together. And damned if it doesn't get done anyway, while I help them try to stop me. You may think that's weird, but it works that way a lot in personal relationships. Somebody comes to me and says, I hate this thing that you're doing, I'm going to stop you, or I'm going to do this about it. I say, okay, good. What do you mean good? You didn't want to change that. Yeah, I know. But I think it's good. I think it's good that you have that point of view. We're not talking about it for a while, and they changed their mind and let me do what I wanted in the first place. How likely do you think that would have been if I told them how stupid they were because they didn't agree with me? I've done that many times. People want to argue and tell me how wrong I am and how they're not going to let me do such and such, and I tell them, good, wonderful, what a great idea. But
is that passive second force?
what's that?
They're initiating something, so you're passive second force to their initiation? Or one
I ain't passive second force to it. I'm going along with it. But I'm sneaking in the back of my mind. I know I'm just working with the second force, and I'm still initiating what I'm going to do. Work with it. You don't have to fight it. You fight it, you've changed what you're doing. It's very interesting, though. That happens a lot in personal relationships, okay? Somebody gets really upset with me, declares, I kept an employee that way one time. They told me they were going to quit, and I wasn't ready to have them quit. And I said, good. How big a severance check would you like? That's what I said. I said, I know it's going to be a little rough on you, just quitting like that. How big a severance check do you want? 3 weeks enough? And instead of quitting, they ended up talking to me, and we had a little discussion, and I found out what was bugging them, and it was no big deal to me. I said, well, then let's do something about it, and they ended up staying on anyway. Now, what do you suppose would have happened if I'd argued with them and told them that was a terrible idea and fought against them quitting? You think I'm going to change their mind that way, by telling them how stupid they are because they want to quit? And I've tried, enticing people. It's like, okay, what would it take to get you to stay? And you give them something, and they quit anyway, after they take it. That's been my experience. So I tried that one time. Somebody was about to quit, and I just wasn't ready for it. So I said, good. How much do you want to quit? And they ended up staying. They actually didn't want to quit, I think. They wanted to do something else, and they didn't know how to tell me they wanted to do something else. So we both got what we wanted. They did a bad job of initiating something that they wanted. It wasn't a very good job, and just said they were going to walk off and go try somewhere else. But they really wanted something. Find out what it is. It was something I was more than willing to give them to keep them. Everything turned out fine. Because I decided not to fight about it. Not to argue or anything, okay? Just said, yeah, great. It's been nice knowing you. Hope you get a great job next. By the way, what's the problem? And then there's a lovely form of resistance. As far as I know, only human beings are capable of doing. We call it contrived. And it's just made up. Governments love it. Big corporations love it. How many times have you called up a corporation because you have a little problem that needs to be taken care of, and you tell somebody all about it, and they say, oh, well, I can't do anything about that. You got to talk to so-and-so. So you say, fine, and then you tell the whole story all over again. And they say, oh, well, I can't do anything about that. You got to talk to so-and-so. Okay, fine. And you tell the whole story all over again, and they say, I can't do anything about that. You got to talk to so-and-so, and then you get connected to the first person you talk to. And they say, well, I don't know anybody else to tell you but that second person. Now what the hell are you going to do? I'm sorry, but this is our procedure. Oh, so what you're telling me is you don't want to do this. And you've come up with this really interesting way to not do it. And that's contrived resistance, isn't it? You've made up rules and regulations about why you can't do a thing, and sometimes there's really nothing you can do about it. Sometimes you can find a way to work around it, and sometimes you just can't. It's just going to stop you, and you may as well give it up. I've seen a lot of rules that seem to be set up for that purpose, to keep people from doing things. That's it. Active and passive second force, as far as I can tell, can always be worked with. It's tricky finding a way to do it, especially since we have that other thing going that says, I want my way and I want it now. And so your first thought is not to work with it at all, but to fight it. But it's really peculiar if the next time you meet up with some active second force, go on with it and see where it takes you. Don't fight it and see what happens. It's really surprising. I've been doing that for years, and just about every time, if I just go along with it, don't fight it, it all turns into something else. And we're all happy in the end. We all get our way. Somebody gives a little something, the other person gives a little something, and everybody goes away happy. And what started out was basically a fight. Weirdest thing. Any questions or comments about this? I have in the past gone into great detail and depth, and doesn't seem to do any good. It's a very weird concept. It doesn't fit our idea of how things are at all. But that's my whole point. You can't have an expectation based on something you don't see. It is not your experience as far as you're concerned. But if you go into things expecting there will be second force, how disappointed are you going to be when it shows up? I was expecting that. I don't normally get disappointed by things I anticipated, unlike that woman at the airport. But she didn't actually expect it, did she? She expected it would happen to somebody else. And that's the unsaid thing in her little story. I'm not upset about it. I'm just upset at having to reap at the consequences, you see. Now, how that's different than being upset about the thing itself, I don't know. But apparently in her mind, that's different. But she did not expect it as she said that she did she? Or she would have planned for it. You understand? I don't get disappointed by a thing that I expect. I get disappointed by things I don't expect. Unless you're really weird and you just expect everything to be horrible all the time. And then I've noticed the people who do that, they're not disappointed by it, they're kind of gleeful. See, I told you it was going to be all fucked up. They don't look too disappointed to me, they look kind of happy. See, I'm right. I knew it was all going to be horrible and it's worse than I thought. They don't look too disappointed to me. So by not understanding this, we can't take it into account. We can't expect it. We expect it to be that simple thing that we put up there in the very beginning, a sequence of steps that will follow each other, cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, until I get to the final effect that I wanted. And I think that's the way it's going to be, and it quite often isn't. Huh. I go into things expecting second force, and eventually even see that not only is second force something to be expected, it's part of getting it done, and therefore to be welcomed. This is part of the job. Without it, I can't get it done. So then I get a whole different attitude once I really experience this for myself. I see the second force and I go, all right, this is going to get done. And I don't experience near as much disappointment as I do when I just don't know the way things work. I have a bunch of illusions about what is. This is one of the remarkable things about we humans, huh? We don't even know the way things are. We live in such a dream world. Sequence of events. How often does that actually happen? Nice little sequence of events, all planned and mapped out in my mind. We even have a saying about that, don't we? Plan your work and work your plan. Has that ever worked for anyone? Have you ever tried it? Never worked for me. Every time I plan anything, it happens so differently that I got to throw away the plans and start all over again. I'd rather just not have any in the first place. I have an alternative suggestion. Whim it. Just make it up on the spot. Deal with it as it happens. You know where you're going, right? Just remember where you're going and whim your way to it. Because I never found that planning worked for me.
Whim?
Whim. That's exactly right.
Is that an acronym? What does it mean?
Whim?
Whim?
Whim.
Whim.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Any questions or comments? I will tell you that this will take work to see. It's very invisible to humans, especially since you think you know what second force is. People out to get you. Should we take another little break? Rubbed you the wrong way this weekend, huh?
You did?
Yeah. I gotta smooth your feathers. I gotta smooth your feathers.
Oh.
That's easy. All right, so let's go back to what we started out with. I have an expectation based on an ideal. A fantasy in the mind of what ought to be. So we looked at one consequence of this. I get to live with life as a struggle. and with a certain amount of misery. Haven't met too many people who don't think that life is a struggle, have you? That seems to be a pretty common point of view. I've met a lot of people who tell me that life shouldn't be about misery and claim that it isn't for them and then be miserable anyway. But I've not met too many people who say that life is not a struggle, have you? That's very possibly where that comes from. I expect unrealistic things, I get disappointed, I get hurt, I try to change them into a thing that is impossible. We actually have a saying that you might want to consider. It says, the struggle towards an illusion which is kind of what we're talking about right now, isn't it? I have an illusion of how things are and ought to be. Okay? And I struggle to make it real. It's a picture in my mind. Now, the sad thing is, you can't just decide not to have pictures in your mind and try and make them real, huh? Because that's how we do everything. That's why I pointed out when we talked about first force. It starts with an idea, doesn't it? A picture in your mind of something you want to do, or make, or whatever. You got to picture it first, don't you? And have some idea about it. And then you start acting on it. That's the way things are done. So we can't just say, okay, no more pictures. No more struggle to make pictures true. Then what are you going to do? But when that picture is an illusion, then struggling towards it is the disintegrating factor. In a human life. That's what brings about disintegration in a human life. Struggling towards an illusion, which we do pretty much from the moment of birth until the moment when disintegration ends, huh? And I guess now it's called dissolution. Is that a valid term for that?
Sure.
So we stop disintegrating and just dissolve. Yep.
When is a picture not an illusion?
When it's possible, duh. An illusion is something that just isn't going to happen. It's not possible, okay? Young ladies pretty dream that we're all going to be nice to each other. You really think that's possible? Well, people do. They do think it's possible, don't they? I don't know. I suspect as long as human beings have desires on occasion, they're going to come into a little bit of nastiness, huh? Even maybe if they're conscious. Don't know. Never seen a world full of conscious people. I just can't say. But I'm sure not going to hope for it tomorrow. You struggle to make that true. All it does is destroy you. And I know a lot of people that do that. They struggle to make their home a nice place where people don't fight with each other and then have kids. And how's that going to work out? How are you going to get your kids not to fight? It just seems to be part of the growing up thing, huh? Even when you have a bunch of kids who all like each other, I suspect they fight on occasion, don't they? I've seen some families like that where the kids all basically really like each other. Not in too many Caucasian families, have you noticed that? They're usually some other culture, but they all like each other and they still fight, don't they? That's struggling to make that one true is kind of wearing. Not going to happen. And, yeah, okay. Maybe the only way you can know that it's an illusion is to check it out and try it, okay? But you have to try it 5 million times? How many times does it take for you to get through your head? I don't think this is going to happen. At a certain point, it really does just become a struggle to make an illusion real, doesn't it? Trying it out a few times makes sense to me. Trying it out for a lifetime don't make sense to me anymore. And that's kind of the next thing we're going to look at here, is where that disintegration comes from as a result of this struggle to make my fantasies reality. So we got through quite a bit of disappointment. I've noticed people often discount disappointment and say, well, I don't get disappointed very often because they only count it if it exceeds a certain threshold. Isn't that about right? So it's only disappointment if it's like a really big thing. I don't know what it is the rest of the time. But I did a little check one time out of curiosity myself. And I tried to keep track of how often the expectations were disappointing, which is really hard because you're doing it far more often than you can even really keep track of. But I did it with as many as I could for a period of time, quite a long time, as I recall 2 or 3 weeks, just to see what the result was, okay? And what I found out was that 75% of the time I was disappointed. Okay, maybe I was a real idiot. Maybe you're not quite that idealistic, I don't know. But that's what I found out. 75% of the time I was disappointed. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? 10% of the time I was dead on. Got things happened just the way I thought they were. The other 15%, it was close enough, I was okay with it. So 25% of the time, I was pretty much okay with things the way they turned out. 75% of the time, they were disappointing. I don't think that unreasonable a case. I think it's probably about the same for most people. It's just constant, ongoing disappointment. Most of it minor, not a big deal. But it adds up. Even little disappointments, when you're doing it 75% of the time, that's most of your day. So I feel hurt. Whoop. I look for something to blame. I get 3 lovely choices. And that's where we left off. Here's another side to the consequences of this way of living. We looked at one side of it. Life is a struggle, and it is quite often miserable. Here's the other side. Each of those answers to what's to blame produces an emotion. If I decide that I'm to blame I start feeling guilty, isn't that right? If I decide that you're to blame, I start feeling angry. And if I don't know, I get afraid. So what that meant was I spent 75% of the time feeling guilty or angry or afraid. Now maybe you don't think you're disappointed 75% of the time, but how many of you spend 75% of your day going between anger, guilt, and fear? Now, you probably don't call them that. I've noticed people get very upset with you if you actually call them those things. You look at somebody and say, well, you don't have to get mad about it, and what do they say?
I'm not mad.
I'm not mad. Well, what are you? I'm just a little disturbed and annoyed. Well, what the hell is that but anger? All right, it's mild degree of anger, but it's still anger, isn't it? So how much of the day do you go through being annoyed by things that happen? Where did that come from except disappointment because you thought it was going to happen different and it didn't, and you said it's your fault? How much of the day do you spend feeling guilty about some little thing you did? How much time do you spend worrying? Because that's a fancy word for fear, isn't it? You don't worry about anything during the day, do you? Where do you think that comes from? But being disappointed and you don't know what's to blame. That's what happens when you don't know. That means that the thing that's to blame is still out there and you don't know when it's coming. And that's what produces the fear, huh? It's still there. There's nothing I can do about it. It's going to get me again. And I can't do anything about it because I don't even know what it is. Can't even fix it. So how much time do you spend worrying? Doesn't that count for about 75% of your day? Did mine. I don't think that is too inaccurate to say that we spend about 75% of our time disappointed, huh? It's not always a big deal, but it's pretty much always there, isn't it? Now here's the deal about these things. We call these emotions. There are 4 basic emotions. The other one that I didn't put up there is called insecurity. And that one just comes from having lived this way for a while. I start to get the feeling that I really don't know what to do to make sure I'm not disappointed. I think I'm just not good enough for it, and I start feeling inferior. So that may be what inferior really refers to, huh? I'm inferior. I can't be happy. I don't know how. Everybody else knows how, but I don't. How much of your sense of inferiority comes from that? How come I can't be happy like the rest of you? That's really insecurity. Okay? I don't think I'm capable of meeting life's challenges. That 4th little emotion just comes from having been disappointed so much that I start to feel like I really don't know how to deal with this. There's something wrong. And out of those 4 basic emotions, you form all the rest. we're so clever that when we look for something to blame it on, we often decide it's to blame on me and you. Isn't that about right? Or you can even say me, you, and I don't know. There's some other thing there that I don't see. We don't just find one cause, even though we believe in cause and effect. We don't see that contradiction. Technically, if there's such a thing as cause and effect, it should be one of those, isn't that right? But somehow we're pretty good at deciding that it's many causes. And then mixing those emotions together. And we got words for every possible degree combination and so on of these things. I personally think there must be a bartender school somewhere that dreams these little things up. That's what it reminds me of, a bunch of people going and mixing the drink. You know. Yeah, a little dollop of fear, that ought to liven it up a bit. Some anger, and maybe some insecurity thrown in, and what do you know, now I'm jealous. It's true, isn't it? That's basically what jealousy is, huh? Insecurity, anger at another person, and fear they're going to do it again. You add those three things together and you got jealousy. All right? And all the emotions that we experience, with very few exceptions, are made out of these four things. But there's a difficulty with them. They are what we today call stress. It ain't good for you. In fact, I'm really convinced that the human form was not even designed to cope with them. I look at other animals on the planet. Have you ever seen a wild animal that was guilty? Have you ever seen a squirrel look around to see if anybody caught it doing something it shouldn't have? You really think we were designed to feel guilt? No other animal does. Now, I know that domesticated animals often feel guilty, don't they? But then you subject them to the same weird conditions that you subject humans to, don't you? You make up a bunch of rules about things that they want to do, but you don't want them to, which are what all rules are about, you know. I really, really, really love this idea. I think it's hilarious. You only make a law against things people want to do. Do you know that? Why would you make up a law about something nobody ever wanted to do? We have signs against it nowadays, but not laws. Isn't that correct? I do find that amusing, that we now are so afraid of being sued that we put up signs that say, don't drink the acid. But I really didn't want to. You really did not have to put that sign up there. You might have cautioned me that it was acid in case I couldn't tell, okay? But once you tell me it's acid, I don't want to drink it anymore. So there really are no laws that I know of specifically about that, are there? Has anybody ever passed a law that said that if you drink acid, they'll put you in jail? Other than the anti-suicide law. I do know about that, but then people do want to commit suicide, don't they? And we don't want them to, so we pass the law against that. But is there specifically a law that says if you drink acid, it's punishable by a $1,500 fine and 3 years in jail? We don't need that law, do we? People just don't have this real hankering to drink acid. So we don't have to have a law against it. You get it? Every law that is on the books is there because you want to do it. Don't rob. Why would you have to tell people not to rob except because they want to? Anybody in this room who never stole anything in their entire life, didn't you try it at least once? Anybody here who never stole anything? And yet, I've heard people tell me this guilty little secret about when they were 8. I stole something. Yeah, welcome to the human race. You know anybody who has it? I'm sure there's somebody out there. This is one that I believe there's probably an exception, somebody who's never stolen anything. But for most of us, we really do want to steal, don't we? So we got to pass a law against it. So we get all this guilt, because you want to do things that you shouldn't do. It ought not to be that way, huh? Says who? Apparently it should be that way, because everybody wants to. It would be sort of nice if you learned it isn't a great idea. I'll agree to that. There are a lot of things that, we'd all prefer you not do, but it'd be kind of neat if you learned it instead of being scared, isn't that right? And having to be punished and all that stuff. We can't afford to do that, so we produce these emotions. I've rarely seen a wild animal afraid. I will admit that I have seen it on occasion. But it's very rare. We assume that an animal is afraid because it's running for its life, but we don't know that, actually. Do you actually know that's what's going on in a rabbit that's running from a fox, that it's afraid? I don't know that. It may be doing the smart thing. It may be running along there congratulating itself on how fast and smart it is. It may not have a bit of fear, isn't that right? That's what it could be doing, huh? It could be confidently hopping along saying, I am so fast and so smart, I'm going to outfox that fox. Isn't that right? It doesn't have to be afraid, does it? We just assume that. I have on occasion seen an animal afraid, it's true. But not very often. I've rarely seen an animal angry. And so apparently, in natural conditions, these things are not very common. So what makes us think that we would have evolved to handle them? Isn't that interesting? We just take them for granted as a part of life, don't we? And assume that there's no problem with them. I don't know where we get that idea from. And as far as I can tell, it is simply not so. They are very destructive things. Some folks did some looking into this out of curiosity to see what some of the consequences are, and they're really quite interesting. When I experience these, we call them a false feeling of emergency. Because as best we can tell, that is how the body interprets that feeling. It interprets anger, fear, guilt, and insecurity the same way it interprets a sense or a feeling that you are about to die. It goes through exactly the same steps and processes that it would go through if you were in an emergency situation. The whole chain gets kicked off. That's the next little step here after this, is that the body mobilizes energy to fight or run. because that's what people do when there's an emergency. Most of the time, huh? In today's world, sometimes an emergency needs another response than fight or flight, right? But basically, that's what the body does. It releases a tremendous amount of energy to be used to deal with the emergency and save your life. And that's exactly what happens when you feel angry, fearful, guilty, or insecure. You release those same chemicals that you would release if you were about to be killed. Yeah.
What accounts then for the specific differences between those emotions? In other words, if the chemicals are the same, what?
Well, they're not exactly the same.
Okay.
There are other things that are released for fear, guilt, and anger and insecurity as well.
Okay.
In the true emergency, you don't get the chemicals that produce anger, fear, guilt, and insecurity, do you? You just get the ones that are there to... What I'm saying is, as well as the chemicals that produce the sensation of anger, fear, guilt, and insecurity, you get the stuff to prepare you for an emergency.
Yeah.
I don't personally actually know whether or not the chemicals that produce the feeling of anger, fear, guilt, and insecurity are in themselves harmful. I don't know. I haven't a clue. It's the effects of that emergency state that I know is harmful, okay? I just don't know about the others. I've never looked into it. But I've never been afraid when there's an emergency. I always do that afterwards, when it's over and there's nothing left to be afraid of. And I think of all the things that could have happened.
Right.
But during the actual emergency, fear doesn't come up. It does for some people, and they're scary people to be around. If you ask me, they're dangerous. If an emergency comes up and I see somebody afraid, I know it's time to take over. They're dangerous, because they're not going to be able to respond to the emergency. They're too busy dealing with some imaginary event. They don't even know what's going on. I once had some folks walk into a place of business where I was working with sawed-off shotguns to rob us. We had a customer there, and the customer looked at me and said, "Phil, this is the worst joke you've ever pulled." Now, at that point, as far as I was concerned, that customer became more dangerous than the two guys with sawed-off shotguns. Because they were going to behave appropriately for the situation, not the customer. They thought it was a joke. They're liable to go up to them and pull their masks off. This is really funny. Who are these folks? And get us all killed. So at that point, all the effort went into working with that customer to get them not to act like a fool. Then I could put my attention on the actual emergency, you understand? But I was liable to get killed by this idiot who thought it was a joke. And I can just see it. The next thing is to get mad at me. This is not funny. And then do something really stupid, you see? That is inappropriate response to the situation. And not even look at it and say, oh, this is interesting. We're about to die if we make a wrong move. Of course, there's another side to that story that I'll often tell, I'll add it. Once I finally got this customer to believe that this was not a joke, we were really getting robbed, and those were real guns and strangers, okay? And I looked at those two guys with guns, and you know, they did have masks. All I could see was their eyes, and you know what I saw in their eyes? Terror. I'll never forget that. They had guns, and they were afraid. And at that point, I knew that I was in charge of the situation, because I wasn't afraid. I was in a hyper state of emergency, and I knew for a fact when I looked in their eyes that everything was going to be okay and I was going to run the show, not them. Isn't that funny? And that's exactly how it worked out. I convinced them that I knew the combination to the safe in the office, which I didn't. Nobody ever told me the combination. I didn't need it. And I convinced them to lock us in the bathroom while they robbed it, because I knew it had a door to the outside. Who the hell puts a door to the outside of a building in the bathroom? Nobody would think of that. So they dutifully locked us up in the bathroom at my suggestion. I went and took the key, which I had, and opened the door, and we all went out and called the cops. And I knew that something like that was going to happen because they were afraid, and I wasn't. I didn't know what it was going to be. That's part of dealing with an emergency. You keep your eyes open, and you watch for an opportunity that comes up. It will show up if you're paying attention. Always. That's been this one's experience. I've been in a number of emergency situations. Something always shows up if you're paying attention, and by God, you better not miss it. It may be a fleeting instant. How are you going to do that when you're all hyped up with anger, fear, guilt, and insecurity? You don't pay much attention under those conditions, do you? So people who do go into an emotional state in a real emergency, as far as I'm concerned, are dangerous. And you deal with them and hope you have some time left over to deal with the emergency, because they're probably what's going to get you killed. They're totally inappropriate to a true emergency, and you don't feel them if you're actually responding to the emergency. The joke to me was, I'll never forget being robbed that way. Because when I did see that look of fear in those two guys' eyes, what I got was this incredible confidence. I can handle this. I know what to do now. I will use their fear against them. They were afraid of us. I have no clue why they were afraid of a bunch of people who didn't have guns, but they were. So I knew they would buy the suggestion to lock us up. Isn't that a hoot? So what I felt was incredible confidence. I've rarely felt that confident in my entire life. I knew that I could be in charge of this situation. And I got all that nice adrenaline hype to go along with it. Boy, I had all the energy in the world to do whatever was necessary. That's a real emergency. Almost dying on the freeway is a real emergency. You don't go into anger, fear, guilt, and insecurity over that, do you? I'm sure you're quite disappointed that you're about to die. I doubt if you went out that day expecting to die, but you don't do that, do you? You declare an emergency, and you go into this weird altered state. You get a tremendous amount of attention and energy, everything that's required to deal with it, and then it goes away when the emergency is over, right? And that's the same thing that happens every time you get angry, fearful, guilty, and insecure. With one interesting exception. The moment you feel this starting to happen, you contradict it and countermand it and say, wait. No, there's no emergency here. You don't know you do that. You're not aware of it, but that's what you tell the body. False alarm. I'm not dying. I'm just upset. So you never actually get to the point of that interesting altered state you get on adrenaline and the other stuff that happens in the emergency. You're all prepared for it, but you don't get there, because that's a pretty instantaneous thing. being aware of this change in your chemical state inside, and then saying, no. I doubt if you even know where it happens, but it does. Now we have an interesting situation on our hands. You are full of deadly poisons. You just injected yourself with adrenaline, which you are not going to use. You're about to die from self-poisoning. You know who? So the next thing that has to happen is something has to be done with all that energy that's released, all those funny little chemicals that are released to save your life. That is technically called an adaptation. That's the technical term for what happens to deal with that. So this is our light. Walking around 75% of the time, struggling and being miserable, and attempting to commit hara-kiri without even realizing it. Because we just think this is the way it is and there's nothing anyone can do about it. You can't control your feelings, right? You can repress them, you can try, you can say, I'll deal with this later, but you can't stop the fact that you get angry, right? You just expect everybody else to. Isn't that funny? You'll tell other people to do it, but how many times have you told people, well, I can't control the way I feel. I just expect you to. Figure that one out. How many times have you demanded that someone else control the way they feel? How many of you have said that at some point in your life? Well, I can't control the way I feel. Why do you expect me to? Well, because that would be ideal. After all, if you controlled the way you felt, then I wouldn't have to, would I? And here we are back again. And that's a weird fantasy. This can actually be observed if you're really willing to pay attention. You do not have to take anybody's word for this. You can observe this going on. You can observe all the weird side effects of being angry and guilty, fearful and insecure. You can watch it happening, and you can watch the adaptation that comes along in a little while to clean up the mess you just made to save your life, if you want to. And then you'll do one of the most bizarre things ever heard of. Not only will you accept responsibility for the way you feel, because you see, while you can't control it, you can be responsible for it, because we just said where it comes from. And say, that's why you can't control it. You don't know where it comes from, do you? These feelings just come from nowhere. You don't know it comes from your expectations of what reality will be, and they're wrong. But if I don't expect reality to be different than it is, where would I get anger, fear, guilt, and insecurity from? So I actually can do something about the emotions if I want to. All I have to do is understand what is and expect things to be that way, which is often a tough job, I will admit, but it can be done. And I can also be responsible for another thing that everyone claims is the worst offense against human dignity. Isn't that right? Sickness and death and old age. I can be responsible for those because this is what produces them. Adaptation to stress. What we call aging is in fact adaptation to stress. Isn't that a hoot? There are two forms of adaptations that you can get. One of them is unusual behavior, and the other one is unusual cellular activity. The idea of these adaptations is to use up this energy and destructive chemicals with some bizarre activity. It has to be bizarre because of the way the human body is made. Every time you decide to do something, the body produces energy for that. There's no way to turn that off that we know of. It just works that way. You say you're going to go eat, and the body releases energy that's appropriate to walking across the room and making and preparing food and digesting it and so on. And it's not the same balance that you would get if you decide you're going to go to the gym and work out. So you need to use this up in some unusual behavior that's outside of your control, that is not intentional. And anything you do that's intentional produces energy for that behavior. You understand? So it's got to come outside. That's why we call it unusual activity. That means one of two things. If it's unusual behavior, then you go on a little binge of some kind. You know those little uncontrollable binges you go on every now and again that just sort of sneak up on you and suddenly you're doing something you didn't want to do? Or maybe didn't want to do, uncontrollably, and then it just sort of stops. That's because the energy's all used up. You don't need that no more. That's unusual behavior. It can be the oddest things. For some people, it's that they go and eat something really strange over and over and over again, gorge themselves on something. Huh? For other people, they go and pick a fight with everybody they meet. Other people go and use drugs of various kinds. Other people go on a crying jag. They get uncontrollable crying for half an hour, just can't do nothing. There's just all sorts of bizarre things that people do when this happens. So this pretty much accounts for all the things that we call psychological illnesses. That's really all psychological illness is, isn't it? It's some bizarre, unusual, wacko behavior that you don't have any control over for a while. Isn't that what it is? The other one, a bunch of cells in the body, all decide to produce some bizarre, obnoxious substance in order to use up that chemical and die in the process. A rather unpleasant experience, which we call being sick. So that pretty much accounts for physiological illness. So in a simple case, a bunch of cells in the nasal passages decide to produce enough mucus to drown a horse. And they do that until they use up all that energy, and then they die. And it's all over with. The rest of the body goes on and survives. That's what we call being sick. It is, in fact, an adaptation to not being willing to understand life as it is. Now, a person who gets this can actually be responsible for their own aging and for their own mental and physical state of well-being. These things are often, really little things, because a lot of the time you spend not being really horribly mad, right? Just kind of annoyed throughout a day. And so you'll get some little twitch every now and again through the day. You ever had that happen? You just get these uncontrollable twitches for a while, for a couple days, and then they go away. You have no clue what's going on. That can be one form of unusual behavior. Isn't always something outrageous. Physiologically, it can be just little aches and pains. Just feeling out of sorts. It doesn't have to be some full-blown disease. Okay? It is really amazing just how good you can feel if you decide not to play the stress game. I know there are other kinds of stress. We'll talk about that tomorrow. I know that this is not the only kind of stress in our lives. I do, however, suggest that it is the most common stress in your life, that you probably don't have a lot of other stresses. So if you take out 90% of the stress and only have 10% left to deal with, how sick do you think you're going to be? Now, the body does this with all stress. It adapts to all stress, not just this emotional stuff. So I'm not sure it's possible to live a completely stress-free life if you want anything at all. I think the only way you could live a completely stress-free life would be to be completely desireless. Without desire, I think you could actually achieve it. You could live a stress-free life. But the minute you want anything at all, you're probably going to run into a certain amount of stress. That seemed about right. So I don't know if you can eliminate stress and adaptation to stress. But you can certainly get it to the point where it's having very minor, small effects. And some people just choose to live stressful lives and are willing to accept the consequences. I don't know what you should do, but I do know what you can do, okay? You can eliminate almost all stress in your life and the consequences of stress, which we call old age and being sick. That I know. This is the one that seems to get people, huh? This is the one that is really hard work. The other forms of stress are pretty easy to deal with. Well, like I say, talk about them tomorrow. But getting people to admit that they're wrong and they don't know the way things ought to be, that seems to be a little tougher. Are there any questions or comments about this?
How would you define an emergency?
I'm about to die. That's my idea of an emergency. Anything else is just something to deal with. I don't care. Threat to the life. There are 4 ways that I know of to die. You can do it biologically, you can do it psychologically, you can do it economically. I forget what the 4th one is right this second. I have to think about it for a second. I've sworn those things off. Not too interested in it anymore. You threaten those things and you threaten my ability to go on living. I call that an emergency. They don't happen very often in this life. Peace of mind. That's the one I forgot. Threaten the peace of mind and I will be dead. It'll take a few years, but I will die from that. You know that, right? You're in the process of it. just not one of the quicker of the four. Any other questions or comments? Pay if you are willing to check this out and find out that it's true. I would say that you are paying a hell of a price for whatever it is you think you want so badly from sleep. What do you think? Boy, you must want it bad. And I would like to suggest that what's even more amusing than the price you're willing to pay for it is that you don't even remember what it is. So you can't even decide if it's worth the price or not. Because you don't know what it is anymore. You're trying to get what you're doing. You think at this point you're just sort of getting through life and you have certain desires that you're trying to fulfill. Isn't that pretty much the way people think of life? Those desires may be things that you want to do, but that's what I would consider fulfilling a desire, wouldn't you? But I don't think that's all you're about. That's kind of what unconsciousness is having forgotten what I'm doing. And now I'm just wrapped up in the doing of it, but I don't remember what I'm doing. And I do think you're paying quite a price for it. So enough for one day?
Yes.
Well, that was heartfelt. Shut up. Okay. You're better at getting this on than I am at getting it. There you go. That
Just
works
tired.
much better. Cool.